Okay, good morning. Welcome to our monthly business advocacy meetings, and really appreciate you all being here and taking the time, as well as those of you who are joining us online. We have three great programming reports today to provide you, as well as we'll give you a preview of what is coming in June towards the end of our meeting. Well, a couple announcements, but I'm pleased today to start off our presentation with our first speaker, and that is the Salem Chamber's consultant lobbyist, Nicole Palmateer-Hazelbaker. Nicole runs a company called Bravio Communications, specializes in strategic initiatives at legislature as well as in communities such as Salem. Please join me in welcoming Nicole.
Thank you so much. It's good to be here. Today is May 1st. Formerly known as May Day, when I remember when my friend Kim and I were little in Elkton and we would leave flowers at people's doors. Today it's Worker Rights Day at the Capitol, so I'm in no hurry. I'll be hanging out this morning. Yeah, so we are a little further than halfway through the session. This is a rough approximation. There's about 3,300 bills that were introduced. 1,300 of those are still alive. 2,000 of those died. There's been a lot of conversation about, oh my gosh, there's so many bills this session. It's really sort of the same. I mean, at least for me, having done this for a while, it sort of feels not any different. But I think what we saw is this massive amount of placeholder bills that none of us knew what was supposed to go in there. If you ever see a bill and they say, to the Department of Transportation to study speed bumps. That's always our favorite. And you know that that's a study bill and it's going to be gutted with something else, or a study on something that seems very vague. They're vague on purpose. So we hit the first deadline now, and the first chamber bills either had to go out of there and onto the floor for vote, or they had to be referred to a committee that doesn't have a deadline. That's all the joint committees, so Ways and Means, Transportation, there's some legislative administration committees, different ones like that. Revenue committees, which is my good friend John and I work in often, revenue and finance and revenue on the Senate side, or to the Rules Committee. Those committees have no deadline, so if you get your bills in there, they're safe. They don't die until the end of session. So I put a little list together of what I would consider some of the hits and misses that we've had so far. So the Agricultural Wage Board, House Bill 2548, we actually expected that to move right out of committee and keep on going to the Ways and Means Committee. It did not. It has taken a pit stop in Rules. It has certainly that one, and the Direct Care Workforce Wage Board Bill, House Bill 3838, I say, again, to that, to the conversation that we often have about it's important to have your voice be heard. Voices have been heard in these bills. Now, will they pass? I mean, I'm not quite brave enough to say they won't pass, but it has slowed them down. So they're both sitting in Rules right now. The Direct Care Workforce Bill had a hearing yesterday. Ag hasn't yet been rescheduled for its next hearing in Rules, but it is taken a little bit of a slower path than we had expected. So we'll see what happens there. House Bill 3119 was the clean truck delay. That one did not move after a lot of work by Representative Shelley Bosshart Davis, and certainly through the industry, that one died. House Bill 2092, John Hawkins will talk to the reconnect/disconnect bill, but I won't take his thunder from that. Prevailing wage, House Bill 2688 is now sitting in Ways and Means. That bill would extend the provisions of prevailing wage to modular manufactured housing, as well as different pieces of sort of, as it's been explained to me, the guts inside. And Rich Duncan, I'm certain, could speak to that more fluently, but we're working pretty closely on that with our client in modular housing. Some of the minimum wage provisions, none of those moved. Senate Bill 916, unemployment benefits for striking workers. It moved off the Senate side. It had its House side hearing yesterday. We assume it will go forward. Washington just passed this same bill, but they put a 6-week cap on it. Oregon's bill does not have a cap. It would be the same unemployment benefits as for a striking worker as for any individual who is unemployed. Oregon has a very generous unemployment insurance provision here. We extended it pretty considerably during the pandemic, and I don't believe we've ever taken that back. House Bill 2592, which would make some improvements to rulemaking, did not move. Some bills that died, Senate Bill 78 and 77, which had to do with farm and land use, those died. So we were happy about that. The bills that are still technically alive include estate tax, House Bill 2112, House Bill 3934, Both still alive. They're in revenue, so they technically stay alive through the end of session. And I think as this revenue conversation unfolds, we're going to see what happens to those. House Bill 2039 is the tax reform, technically still alive. Everyone is waiting with bated breath for May 14th. May 14th is when the revenue forecast comes out. We hear a lot of things running around right now in the Capitol. I don't believe that there's any way you won't see some sort of impact, certainly in the manufacturing sector, retail sector, those ones due to all the different changes that are happening at the federal level. It's just impossible not to see that. But what the big, rainy cloud hanging over this is in fact what's happening as far as dollars from the federal government that are being pulled back out of the state. And that is happening for whatever reason, and whatever side you may be on, it really is happening. And Oregon is a state that is very highly dependent on federal dollars for our state budget. We will have one of the highest percentages. So there's almost no way you won't see that impact. What you won't see is Oregon's revenue from taxes. It's not going down at all. It continues to just, as we all know, it continues, ask my accountant, it continues to be flying right up. So it's an interesting space where Washington came into their legislative session and they had a deficit in their budget. They had decreased revenues. They've just passed a gigantic tax package, or it's under consideration, I think. To try to fill those holes in. Oregon doesn't have a tax-based hole in our budget. That's not the problem. The problem that's causing all the fear is this federal budget. I think that, I work with healthcare clients and we work a lot in DC, and we really believe that a work standard is coming to Medicaid. That will make a significant difference, in the healthcare field. It will impact how much money comes in to the state from Medicaid. Yesterday, the Oregon House Republicans introduced a version of the transportation plan. It has no new taxes, no public transit, rail, bicycle, pedestrian, or climate-friendly projects. Probably not going anywhere. But it is another side to this conversation on transportation. And I talked to a member of the Transportation Committee the other day, and they said, we came into the session with a transportation package. Then it went to a small box. Now we're maybe at a business-sized envelope. They're taking that package and it's going like this very, very quickly. They're going to have to take a revenue vote, but they understand that they are not going to be able to take the magnitude of votes. What was proposed in the original framework had 10 different taxes, maybe 14, I think it was 10 different taxes in it, and they just aren't going to be able to do it. My understanding is they'll take 2 revenue votes total. That's what the goal is, and that will be it. Anyone who has a supermajority and takes a tax vote almost guarantees that you will lose that supermajority in the next election. It's a guarantee. They know that, they understand that. So I think that that's why you're seeing a lot of these pro-labor, worker-led bills going through very quickly right now before those revenue votes come. So, there's a very intentional timing to all of this. And John and I, with the CPAs, will be studying that revenue forecast very closely, and then we'll beat our heads against the wall for a few minutes and move on. But, after the 14th, what you're going to see is a rush now to move to what we're going to do with the money. Certainly those conversations are happening. The session has to be done by June 29th. They want to get out sooner. When I talked to the speaker's office a couple of weeks ago, they talked about, we want to pass continuing service level, do the things we have to do, a little bit in, behavioral health, a little bit, we have to do some of the transportation package, and then we want to get out of here. We don't want to do anything else because we just don't have the capacity to do it given how cautious the session is. One other bill I will bring up, just because it's near and dear to my heart, or not in a good way, Senate Bill 1166. This is a bill that's come in. It's another labor-led bill, and it has to do with rideshare. And we talked about this at the board level. What's interesting about it, so it would directly impact companies like Uber and Lyft. Uber is my client. But the piece that's very interesting is, again, this is putting minimum standards for pay and benefits on independent contractors. That is a game changer. I am an independent contractor. I'm happy to be an independent contractor. And, part of what I do is to demonstrate my value, and that is how I am compensated for it. This says that as an independent contractor, which all drivers are in rideshare, you have to be paid this much. You have to have these benefits. That changes the whole game. I mean, that's a whole different way of looking at the independent contractor. Something that the rideshare companies have worked very hard in other states to work with or to try to find negotiated deals, and remains to be seen what the options are. If the bill were to pass as it is, it would either collapse the market or the companies will leave the state. So remains to be seen. But with that, I want to stay cognizant of my time. Happy to answer questions, or I'm happy to turn it on over, Tom, whichever you prefer.
Well, we actually had you for another 6-7 minutes, but we can jump into questions right now. Questions from the group regarding the legislative session. I'll jump in.
Nuts.
Casey Jama has been super following this Uber rideshare bill. It appears that this is just part of a staged, slow progression to eventually have these worker standards in many, many different industries, and they're picking off some low-hanging fruit. Is that transparency being expressed and openly talked about, or is this just hush-hush due to the power that Speaker Jama has right now?
Right. Senate Majority Leader, but you're right. It is his bill. He is, certainly listening very heavily to the drivers union on this. But I think with Ag Wage Board, with the Direct Care Workforce Wage Board, with Senate Bill 1166, with a wage standard for independent contractors, we are seeing exactly that. What the wage boards do is they take all the jurisdiction from state agencies as it pertains to, in these cases, collective bargaining, salaries, training, standards, but also private right of action. Jameson can explain that better than I can. But, all of the pieces that normally fall underneath a state agency, they're taking it out. This is no different as well. It makes some of those same provisions so that all of that now is being controlled, considered, directed by the third party that is in general labor driven. And so you're taking the authority away from the state, you're empowering one side versus the other, and you're changing the balance very considerably. And you're exactly right. They're doing it in industry at a time, one piece at a time. And, the gig economy, whether it's rideshare or whatever it is, there's, it's a whole new world that we've all entered into. And it is built on flexibility. It's built on independent contractor. It's built on, my ability to go out and drive for Uber for an hour while my kid's in dance class and, make a little money and then move on. And Rory has a friend who her dad, drives for Uber Eats, pays for their vacations that way. And he just does it, while his daughter's in class or whatever she's doing. But this starts to remove that and puts more of a structure and a frame around it, because that puts it more under the control, in my opinion, of the labor side and takes the flexibility and independence away from it. But I think you're right.
Can I ask a question? Is this so far limited just to rideshare?
It is.
But once the camel gets his nose under the tent, it comes all the way in with other industries.
Well, and that's our concern with watching the Ag Board and the Direct Care Workforce Board. Those are huge industries, huge. Ruth and I could sit here and talk to you for days about what this might do. And same with the Ag boards. This upends the whole balance, the whole economics. And I was not a good student of economics in business school, but enough that, when you upend it like that and you cause the balance of power to change, similarly to unemployment benefits for striking workers, then you're at a disadvantage. Oregon is traditionally has become a very blue state. And putting these things into statute makes it very hard to get them back out. And that's, above everything, on top of the pile of things we're worried about, that's also the problem that it lives here forever.
Yes, Dick.
How come we never discuss about the competition of other states? Interesting that a local state billion have in Indiana.
Yeah, I think that it should have. And I think, it's been very much up in the face of people with what happened with the CHIPS Act. Oregon put a whole bunch of money and time and energy, and we didn't get anything. We got nothing out of that. Oregon is not a competitive state. Obviously we have a very, very high tax rate. Our CPA friends could speak to that eloquently. We are very, driven by labor and their interests, which constrains business, and businesses are leaving. We're seeing it, but there's the other side of it that is not interested in talking about that. They are interested only in talking about what could they, can have enshrined in statute now. And then to heck with how you pay for it, good luck, because there are so many ramifications of this, and that's what we've been talking about with Senate Bill 1166. Who's going to pay a 40% increase in their Uber ride? I'm not, and they're a client of mine. But so does it collapse the market? Yeah. Are 11,000 drivers out of a job? Potentially, but that doesn't seem to be resonating. And that's what keeps me up at night and causes Ryan to lose his mind because I just keep talking about it.
Yeah, Lyle, and then Cassidy.
Yes, I can.
The ag labor.
Well, it took a pause. It's taking a little tiny slower route. It should have gone from the labor committee straight to Ways and Means. That's what we expected. But enough people have stood up on this one and said, this will devastate the industry. This will devastate how we do business. We can't afford to do it. It's already a tough one to make money. And my grandfather was a rancher and it was hard back in the 80s. So it's taken enough of a pause that it moved to rules. So it's still, the bill's going to live to the end of the session, but it's at least taken a little bit of a pause. And I would encourage you when there are opportunities, and I'm happy to keep Jameson, aware when the bill comes back up, because it will have another public hearing, to weigh in on it. If you care, if this is an issue that resonates with you, because that does at least make that voice known rather than just sitting back and taking it. And I think that's really important. So we'll see. I would like to be optimistic. I think the fact that it had to take kind of a little detour is never a bad thing.
Cassidy.
Does the Uber bill apply to drivers, like delivery drivers and stuff, for grocery stores and stuff?
Not employees. This is restricted just to rideshare. So Uber and Lyft are the only two in the state right now.
And you might have already mentioned this, I might have dismissed it, but House Bill 3054, the manufactured park, meant to increase limits.
Right.
Is that one?
I think that one went, but I can look it up and let you know.
We were doing that, Nicole. We were very upfront in the last session regarding labor hours for farm workers. And they put a cap on that, and that was very important to them. And the labor side, in the end, did limit the amount of hours that farmers workers could work. So they no longer stayed with one employer and took the overtime. They now took second shifts at a different employer and ultimately lost out on hundreds of thousands of dollars of local wages due to that policy. And yet labor is so proud of that point, but the very people they're representing now are not allowed to go get overtime for one company. They have to jump to a second company, and they have been loud about the fact that they have done just that. Are those conversations occurring within the walls? Is there any reality of what occurs when we impose these type of policies?
You would think so. 3054 is moving, Shane, just so you know. It's going. But I think that, what we saw, for example, in Washington, Seattle passed its own ordinance around delivery drivers like Uber Eats and not Lyft, Uber Eats and Postmates and DoorDash and all those. It diminished the market so much that actually the drivers came forward with a proposal to undo it. But they've not been successful in entirely undoing it. And, we keep having the conversations, and they're having them too with wage boards and all of these things of this is what will happen. But there's just this strong sense of, well, we'll figure out how to pay for it. It'll be fine. Like someone will pay for it without really looking at the reality of it. And I think that's where not understanding the reality on the ground, what it is to run a business. What it is to run a business is very different than what it may be to run a labor union. These are not the same things. And understanding how people are paid, the consistency in job, how people are able to, be a part of this and how we make a business work. I think we're talking about it as much as we can, but the other side of that is a very loud voice, very loud.
Last questions for Nicole.
It's the primary component of this bill for the taxi cab drivers.
No, it's a group called Drivers Union, and they started out in other states. They're primarily kind of a unofficial offshoot of the Teamsters, and have started and doing this in multiple states. So Washington sort of came into Oregon and said, you guys need to do this too. It is mostly driven by Portland, a group of Portland drivers that are doing this, who spoke with Senator Jama, who's from the Portland area, are pushing it the most strongly.
So, I mean, you keep saying that the state tax credit stuff is like, it's still alive, but it's not moving forward. Of all, I think there's 3 bills that are there. One, they're talking more favorably about one.
They haven't shown their hand on which is going, as far as a revenue bill, we don't know which one it is. We know some things are off the table. Tire tax. I mean, so the tire tax was originally proposed as its own standing bill in the transportation package. Then it was had a hearing where it was literally 1,500 people were in opposition to it.
Put it into the transportation package itself. Now it's been taken back out. So we know a few of those things that are coming out, but what we don't know is exactly what's in there. But I'm like learning more about that, and people are kind of starting to talk a little bit. So as we know more, we'll share that information.
Any education bills that you're concerned about?
To be fair, I don't have education clients, but we've been watching the school budget conversation. And just because school budgets are one of the biggest budgets in the state, you know, behind the Department of Human Services and the Health Authority, education comes in right after that. And, you know, coming into the session, the governor did not endorse a new tax or changing the current funding structure. Instead, it was more of what happens on the inside of it and how those things happen. We haven't heard a lot about it, which is interesting because traditionally they try to get the education budgets out first. But as different changes happen from federal direction in school funding, now the schools are starting to come in because they want that backfill. Certainly the co-chairs had said at the beginning of the session, you know, we want to be conscientious if we need to backfill. And it's been kind of quiet, but now it's actually happening. And so now you're seeing these groups come in. And that real question is, what is the state going to backfill and what are they not? They can't do everything. And so for example, you know, groups from CASA, groups for, you know, domestic violence, groups from, you know, who are affected by Department of Justice are all starting now, they're starting to come in, and education is no different. But it is interesting that we haven't heard a lot right now because we normally do. We normally have an idea by this time.
Close with this, and hopefully you can provide a little color. Maybe a little surprising, we saw that Governor Kotek has endorsed publicly the City of Salem's request for capital district dollars. Could any color or insight on that and what that means on its chances of moving forward in a Christmas bill at the end of session?
I think that 6 million is a tough call right now. That's a big dollar amount. You know, we're told if it's $1 million and under, we'll talk about it. You know, I certainly believe in the purpose and cause of it. The governor also commented that no one has talked to her about it yet. And I think that was a really telling statement that she made in that article, that she's like, no one's talked to me about it, but I think, you know, I would support it. One of the tricks of this proposal is that Salem is not the city with the largest amount of state-owned property. We're actually, I think, about 6. I think that's right. 6. So per capita, we're not the biggest. Capital is not as big as University of Oregon. It's not as big as Oregon State University and those kinds of places. So I think there's a compelling argument because of the capital, but the 5 other cities ahead of us think they have a pretty good argument too. And that's the concern, is that you say yes to one, here come the other 5 running. And, you know, how do you make that argument for what is or is not fair? I have a conversation coming up with a couple of our delegation, and that's kind of on my list of what's going on, you know. Do you need us to help you? Is there something happening? What the ask is. When I've spoke to the people who are working on it, they give it a 50-50 shot. So, you know, I think more will become clear here in the next few weeks, and I have it on my list to talk to them about.
Join me in thanking Nicole for her efforts. Well, we're not going to go far. We're going to stay in legislature, and we're now very pleased to introduce you to John Hawkins. John has been a long-term member of the Salem Chamber, an incredible leader in this community. He is JD CPA, tax principal at REDW, advisors and CPAs. Let's welcome John.
Good. So I'll let my PowerPoint get up there. been a part of the Oregon Society of CPAs has gone to the legislature for 30 plus years, and we have made a presentation to them, excuse me, on what federal tax law changes have happened and what Oregon should do to try to stay connected and what the impact would be to Oregon. And I've been a part of that team for about the last 10 years or so, going before both the House Revenue Committee and the Senate Finance and Revenue Committee and given this testimony. We try to stay out of public policy. We just try to do an informational meeting, provide information to them. But I think this year it's become political. So just to make sure we're all, and make sure this thing works, I'm supposed to point it there. There we go. So to make sure we're all on the same, starting on the same page. And then if you've had your TV on at all, you probably know this. The Tax Cuts and Jobs Act that was passed back in 2017 is going to expire at the end of 2025 if Congress doesn't do anything. And the effective date was back in, like I say, 2017. If Congress is not able to pass a new law, we will revert back to what the federal law was when Obama was in power and the presidency. And the broad brush is that tax rates will go up. That was one of the things that the Tax Cut and Jobs Act did, is it lowered the rates, it expanded the brackets, but it also took away some deductions. So in my mind, it expanded the tax base and it expanded the monies that are taxable, but it lowered the rates. And overall, it was a tax savings at the federal level for folks because of lower tax rates. So Oregon has, whoops, pointing at the wrong thing. I want to point at the screen. Oregon ties to federal in two different ways. And they have what we call rolling, kind of permanent rolling reconnect, where in the Oregon tax statutes, they will say, we will tie to the definition of federal taxable income. And it's just a rolling connection. If the federal government changes a tax law in mid-session or in between sessions, Oregon automatically reconnects, because if it's a change that changes the definition of federal taxable income, it changes Oregon. The other thing that Oregon does is they'll have a fixed date connection. The definition of federal taxable income, well, that's not going to take into consideration any changes that might be credits or procedural things. I know that for PERS, you don't want different laws with pension plans for federal level than what you have at the state level. So they will use this fixed date connection to make sure that some of the other provisions are picked up and changed and kept current at the state level. Oregon will from time to time come in and exclude specific federal changes. They've done that with what I call 199A, or the qualified business income, that deduction you get for a business, if it's a Schedule C or a LLC or something like that. You get this kind of made up out of air 20% deduction. You take your net profit you have from your business and you just get this 20% deduction. That is something Oregon said, we're not going to do that. We're going to disconnect from that. They have their own provision where they lower the tax rate from 9% to 7%, but it's tied to having a certain number of Oregon employees. So they're wanting to reward people that go out and hire employees, but not necessarily give this blanket 20% deduction. So there will be occasionally some specific law changes. There. It still didn't work.
Yeah.
There we go. All right. So, nope, I did two there at once. No, it didn't change, did it?
It went to.
It went two. It went two. Okay, let's go back. I'm sorry. You make me technologically change. All right. So, Oregon Society of CPAs and many other business groups, we support the permanent rolling reconnect. And our mantra that we have gone before the legislature and argued for years is that having consistency between the federal law and the state law There's less risk of errors by taxpayers that do their own return. You know, there's less confusion they might have. There's less risk of errors with professional preparers, particularly some that might be out of state. I know that I feel like my software provider treats Oregon like the redheaded stepchild, that we're kind of the last state that gets updated sometimes. And then it also helps with administration with the Department of Revenue. If they're having to deal with correcting errors, communication, you know, correspondence with taxpayers, it's more efficient for the administration of tax for the Department of Revenue. So that's our mantra. We want that rolling reconnect. It just makes life better. So, come on.
Dan can advance.
Yeah, go ahead and advance it. All right. So we get to this year and we have House Bill 2092. And it started off as the traditional connect bill. It had both the rolling reconnect and the fixed date connection in the bill. Now, we were scheduled to have a hearing before the House Revenue Committee on February 27th, and it was fairly early in the session. The day before, the state economist came in and gave his revenue forecast for the first quarter. And in that forecast, he said, I am assuming that we will have an extension of the Tax Cut and Jobs Act. And I think it scared some of the members of that committee. This is my personal opinion. No one's said this. So that afternoon, the day before we're going to testify, Amendment 1 appears, and Amendment 1 gets rid of the rolling reconnect, has only the fixed date connection. So we show up the next day and we testified. Can you change? Okay. We testified in favor of the bill, but against Amendment 1. And so did almost every business organization that was there, OBI and some others. After we had all testified, Chair Nathanson spoke for a while and kind of thank you for your testimony, but due to this period of financial uncertainty, she was supporting, and I think she was the one that asked for Amendment 1 to take away the rolling reconnect and just have a fixed date. One of the things that I had said in my testimony is that if you go to a fixed date kind of indefinitely, if we come back to next session and want to go back to a rolling reconnect, well, tax bills are not effective until 90 days after end of session. Even with next year being a short session, you know, it wouldn't be over till like the 1st of March. 90 days after March, you got April, May, June 1st. That's after the filing deadline of April 15th. That's not very workable. Tyson, you agree? You know, it's a headache for us. So they called the testimony, and then like a day or two later, I get a call from Chair Nathanson, and she says there may be an amendment. And there's like 2 amendments that are kicking around. One would be, they would be a disconnect from the rolling reconnect for 1 year, an automatic reconnect back on January 1st of 2026. There was another amendment, amendment number 7, that actually was 2 years before they went back to a rolling reconnect. But what ultimately got put into the bill and passed to this House floor was Amendment 6, which said we're going to do a 1 year disconnect from the rolling reconnect, have this fixed date, and then come January 1 of 2026, we'll go back to a rolling reconnect. That bill passed on the Senate, on the House floor, and then it went before the Senate Finance and Revenue Committee. There was a hearing on April 9th. Again, the Oregon Society and some other groups went to that hearing. I testified there. And as far as I know, nothing has happened. Now, Senator Meek, just the type of questions he asked, the vice chair asked, I'm feeling that they're struggling with this a bit. They understand the importance of having a rolling reconnect, but same time, they understand the financial uncertainty that the legislature is at. So let's see if we can extend. Huh?
They moved it forward for you.
Oh, did they? Okay. So where we're at is that if Congress, if the bill as it stands now passes, if Congress merely extends the Tax Cut and Jobs Act into 2027 and forward, it's really not going to create an issue for Oregon. But if they have any retroactive provisions in this federal tax bill, it will impact us, and there's some of the things that have been discussed have been, no tax on Social Security. Well, Oregon already does not tax those. So that's a change with really no difference. It doesn't cause a difference. But if there's no tax on tips or no tax on overtime, and if that is retroactive in any way, that will be a disconnect from Oregon and federal. And one of the things that's frequently a part of this bill, it's been discussed some, has been bonus depreciation. I know all business owners typically like bonus depreciation. You go out, buy equipment, you can write off the entire purchase price in the year you purchase it. We can kind of do that with smaller businesses with the expensing election, what I call 179. But bonus is always better in some cases. So most cases. So if they have bonus depreciation that's retroactive, then we're going to have a difference in federal and state. And the thing that accountants just hate is changes to depreciation, because it's not just a 1-year change. If I've got a piece of equipment that's being depreciated over 15 years, and there's just 1 year Oregon's different, for the next 15 years, I will have a difference between my federal depreciation and my state depreciation. And every time I see that schedule in a tax return, I get angry, So anyway, what's going to happen? I think Nicole's already hinted at it. I think the big thing that people are waiting for is the revenue forecast in May of 14. And that's about 2 weeks away. Actually, it is 2 weeks away from today. I've been on the Council of Revenue Forecast Advisors for about 20 years. We get a little bit of a sneak preview. We try to, what the accountants try to do is give some color, because there's always, with tax law changes, there's behavioral changes. And so, they have economists that can calculate, if you take away the mortgage deduction, here's what it'll cost. But there'll be behavioral changes, and we try to give the state economists some color on what we think behavioral changes might be with certain tax. I do not envy his job, and particularly right now in this time of economic uncertainty, just watching my 401k the last 2 months, I would not want to be the one to have to come up with a forecast. So it'll be interesting to see what he does. And I think that the outcome of that forecast is really going to shape what they do with this tax bill. I think the other thing that might come into play here, and Senator Meek actually said this during the testimony, is that our session goes to the end of June. Maybe the federal government will do something before then. And if they have an idea, they're just not willing to run the risk of the federal government making a significant tax law change and Oregon not being able to do anything about it. So I think that if we do get a tax bill, and we've heard Memorial Day is a time that maybe the federal government will do something, if that's session, maybe that will give us some certainty that will allow this to move forward. So still up in the air. I think Senator Meek, chair of the Senate Finance and Committee, I think he's kind of holding this, is my impression. He's holding it, waiting to see what happens before he passes it on to the Senate floor. So why don't I stop and see if people have questions?
So the state's chief economist is relatively new still.
Yes.
And my understanding is that he made some structural changes in how they come to an economic forecast.
Yes.
So the revenue side, all the different pieces that go into that. And I'm wondering about your opinion as to whether or not those structural changes make sense, or if the revenue is actually going to be there. Because as Nicole noted, Oregon is one of the few states that came into this session without huge revenue shortfalls.
I think some of his changes are good. I mean, I think one of the things we've seen this yo-yo of a kicker refund almost every other, I mean, it's the way it's written, it would be every other year. I think one of the things he's taken into consideration is that the way it fits on the tax return, when you have a kicker refund, when people that make, the self-employed and others that make quarterly estimated tax payments, there's a safe harbor says, if I pay an amount equal to last year, I don't have a penalty if I've underpaid. Well, that kicker comes into that calculation. So I can pretend like there's going to be a kicker next year, pay lower quarterly estimates, but then have a large balance due in April. And as long as I know that's coming, can plan for it, usually our clients are fine with it. I'd rather have my money in my pocket than give it to government sooner than I have to. But there's been this, what he's called an April surprise, where they look at the dollars coming in the door in April, the year after a kicker refund, and it's like, wow, that's way more than what we projected. And I think he's tried to take that in consideration. I think some of his changes are good. They do an economic forecast, and then they try to project what type of tax revenue. And then at the same time, they're watching almost on a daily basis how much money is coming in the door at Department of Revenue. What are they seeing in tax withholding? And what are they seeing in what they call final payments when people file their return? So I think he's done some good things, but it did result in a much higher revenue forecast, I think, in December than, the December forecast is what the governor uses for her budget. This forecast in May is what this legislature uses for its budget. And but in December, it was a substantial increase.
Additional questions for John? Dick?
John, what's the elephant in the room, though? Backfill, isn't it? I mean, I don't think Washington, Oregon, and California are the most favored states. With the management back in Washington, D.C. So you take the senators from Oregon, Washington, I mean, they're not divided about the party spectrum.
No, we're probably not one of the administration's favorite states right now. I think anything on the West Coast is, but that would, I don't know if that affects tax as much as it is the other federal funding that Nicole referenced earlier, that there's a lot of agencies. I listened to thing that the Liberty House did, and they had a lot of federal funding, and they're have lost some of that federal funding. And there's a number of other organizations, CASA and some others, that do great things in this community, and they've lost some of that federal funding. Hopefully we can get some of it back.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, please.
So I'm clear about it, because this is what I keep saying, so I should probably make sure it's right. With a disconnect in this year as it's proposed. So let's say this tax package comes out, the federal government, which we're expecting, and we're expecting to see some tax cuts in it. I mean, that's been what the Trump administration really hung their hat on, that red one, on like tax cuts. If those pass and are retroactive, when I do my taxes or when Kim does my taxes, because I should never do my own taxes, in this year, for my state definition of taxable income, I will not get to take some of those cuts as it pertains. So my state taxable income would be higher than if we reconnected.
Yes.
That is right. Okay. That's how I understand it. And what I hear on my side of the fence is, the reason certainly Representative Nathanson is so interested in that is Oregon wants to hang on to as much money as they can.
So You're right, that if there is a retroactive change from the federal, that it will not be included in Oregon. But what they're afraid of is that if the Tax Cut and Jobs Act expires, one of the things that people save money is lowering the rates, but they took away deductions. Well, if those deductions come back, Oregon's tax rate's fixed. And what surprised me is in talking with the legislative revenue officer is that the one that concerns them the most is miscellaneous itemized deductions. That deduction went away. But if it comes back because Tax Cut and Jobs Act expires, that will reduce Oregon taxable income and would have a significant impact on their revenue. You think of the limit on state and local taxes. If that goes away, you don't get to deduct your Oregon state income taxes on your Oregon return anyway. But I've got clients that have more than $10,000 in property tax. Maybe they own a vacation home, have two homes. They might have 25,000 of property taxes. They're fairly good sized houses. They're limited to $10,000. So there's just right off the bat, there's two deductions that would impact Oregon tax returns if we did not extend and they stayed connected.
Any last questions for John? Join me in thanking John for his
Well,
work. Talk about resiliency in this community. 7 years ago, 6 years ago, officially moved away from a project of a third bridge, as many of you are aware. When we look at resiliency and how we get our transportation around in the event of something like a Cascadia or a critical earthquake and the like, we have key infrastructure that needs to be in place. And as you likely read in many of the press newspapers, the amount of bridges in Oregon that are completely dilapidated with no funding around them to retrofit. It is encouraging today to give you a firsthand update of what will be occurring right here in Salem, specific to our Center Street Bridge project. Today, we're joined by Andrew Walker with the Oregon Department of Transportation. He works in the agency of bridge. He's an agency bridge reviewer. And join me in welcoming Andrew.
Thank you. I think we saved the best for last. Only kidding. The tax stuff is actually pretty interesting. I had an LLC at one point, and I pay taxes just like everyone else. So it's kind of fun one of the benefits of doing kind of a PR tour is you get to hear a lot of different speakers that you don't normally get to hear from. So it's kind of fun. Anyway, so thank you for the introduction. Like you said, my name is Andrew Walker. I'm the project manager for the Center Street Bridge seismic retrofit. Appreciate the opportunity to present to you today, and we'll go through what we're going to talk about. There you go. So first I'll start with just kind of a high-level overview of what the project entails, the scope, what we're doing, what we're not doing, and some reasons why. I'll hit the project schedule, where we're at in design. I'll go through some anticipated impacts, focusing on what you could expect during construction and what that would look like, with some caveats that, construction is a squirrely business, as I think quite a few people here probably already know. Hit the construction schedule, when we think those impacts will happen and how those will come to fruition, and then have some time for questions at the end. So the bridge seismic retrofit was split into two phases, phase 1 and phase 2. The phase 1 includes the retrofit of the river spans, so the ones that proper go over the bridge, as well as the ramps on the east side. There's 2 ramps we'll be retrofitting on the east side. It includes the city water line. The city of Salem currently has 3 water lines that serve West Salem, none of which are seismically resilient, one of which is currently on the Center Street Bridge. And we will be both upgrading that water line and making it resilient. So currently it's a 24-inch water line. We'll be upgrading it to a 36. So you'll get an additional capacity in the present, and then resiliency for the future. If you're keen on seeing that there's 2 different phases and one Phase 1 doesn't include the entire bridge. You're right. Phase 1 includes the river in the east, and then Phase 2 includes the west. So part of what we would do in Phase 1 is develop an emergency response plan if the Cascadia subduction zone earthquake happened in the interim between Phase 1 and Phase 2. And then the other thing we'll do in Phase 1 is study Phase 2 a little further. One of the reasons we split it into two phases is because the west side of the bridge is on soil that's called liquefiable. It just means during an earthquake, what looks like solid will become it'll perform more like a liquid. And so the foundations that are there are not really adequate for retrofit. We learned this once we started the project. And so in order to keep the project moving forward and do as much as we can as soon as we can, it made sense to split it because the west side will likely need to be replaced in some form or fashion as our retrofit, opposed to just strengthening the existing bridge. And once you get into a replacement, it's just a different level of design. It takes a little more time. You have to consider more factors. The staging and the construction methods are a little different. And so, like we said, in order to keep within our funding limits and to keep the project moving forward so we can get as much retrofitted as quickly as possible, we split it into two phases for the purposes of construction. But we will continue looking at Phase 2, seeking funding and developing that design. So Phase 2 would include likely the replacement of some portion or all of the west ramps. It would depend on when we are able to identify that funding, as well as when we can finish that design. And then the impacts would likely be pretty similar to what you're going to see for construction on Phase 1, but it would be slightly different because it's going to be a replacement opposed to a traditional retrofit. So now I'll just talk about some of the elements that we're looking at in the Phase 1 construction. So sort of the transition zone between Phase 1 and Phase 2 is on that west side where we have that liquefiable soil. And so this one requires a little bit of a unique solution. We're gonna replace the existing foundation there in that orange circle. We're going to replace it with something called a super bent. It's going to look similar to the Abernathy project. If anybody's familiar with that project up there, they're using a super bent technique for their retrofit on that bridge, which is essentially two new drilled shafts on either side of the existing foundation. And then we put the bridge onto that new foundation and we'll demolish the existing foundation. In the river, taking a slightly different method. This one, we're enlarging the existing foundations that are underground. So you'll see kind of a large column that goes down into the water, and then that goes onto it's not a spread footing, it's actually on piling, but we'll be enlarging that footing and then putting additional piling and anchors on those. And then on the east side, we're doing a number of different things. We're enlarging footings, we're making walls instead of individual columns, we're adding anchors and additional steel piling for structural support as well. And lastly, like I mentioned before, we'll be dealing with the water line, the city water line. We'll be replacing that with a larger, more resilient water line. One benefit of this is that the entirety of the water line that exists on the bridge is within Phase 1. So within Phase 1, the entire water line will be resilient on the project, and the city will have a resilient crossing once we're done with Phase 1. So we're currently in design. We're working on some of our permitting. We're working on developing that design, like I mentioned. We're working on getting right-of-way kicked off. We expect to have our design completed by the end of the year and bid the beginning of next year and start construction sometime spring, middle of next year, be completed in 2029. A couple asterisks on that, in design and in construction and in bidding projects, there's things that come up that can delay the project, but we're currently on schedule and we think we can meet this schedule now. So what can you expect for impacts during construction? So first thing you can expect is work bridges and cofferdams. Again, this looks pretty similar to what you'll see out at Abernathy. It's a little bit different, but they have cofferdams and work bridges like we do. So the contractor, in order to work in the river, needs a platform to do so, something to use their cranes and access those foundations. In order to access those foundations, you need a cofferdam. Cofferdam is just an isolated area using sheet piling where you can dewater the area around the foundation and actually get down and enlarge it and drive new piles and connect those elements. And then, yeah, there'll be a work bridge from either side. There's a navigable channel on the east side of the bridge. So if you look between those orange rectangles, there's an area where larger vessels like the Willamette Queen, the stern wheeler that's downtown can get through, as well as any other traffic. And there'll be areas underneath the bridge for smaller vessels if they wanted to cross on the west side. Another impact that this construction will have is removing some of the trees in the area. Most of these are associated with the cranes we'll be using for some of the larger retrofit items like rebar cages, steel piling, that kind of thing. And so cranes need a boom swing for those that are familiar with construction, and trees don't allow that. So in those areas directly adjacent to the bridge foundations where we need cranes, we have to remove some of those trees. I would highlight that we've gone through pretty extensively trying to maintain as many trees as possible. The city and ODOT have worked together and gone tree by tree trying to protect, and we have protected a good number of trees. Any trees that we're taking out, we'll be replacing per the city's requirements with native species and species that are actually probably more appropriate for this area, especially within like the parking area. We'll be adding additional soil in that area so those trees can be healthier, adding trees that are more appropriate for a parking area. There's a number of cottonwood and Oregon ash that are there. Oregon ash is probably going to go extinct in Oregon just because of some of the environmental concerns that are going on with I think it's a burrowing beetle or something like that that's killing all the Oregon ash in Oregon. So we're replacing these with trees that are a little more resilient. And we'll be replacing all the trees that we impact. So something else to consider for the construction are the different traffic impacts we'll have. There's a number of traffic impacts because we have to do some deck work. There's joint work that needs to be done as well. And for the joints, there'll be large holes in the deck, and so that isn't really conducive to traffic traveling over the top of it. The first one is nighttime closures. We're expecting maybe 4 to 6 days of nighttime closures somewhere in that area. That'd be probably in the range of around 10 o'clock to 4 o'clock in the evening on a weekend. So no more than 2 days at a time for just that short duration. Again, that could change during construction. That could change even during design. That's what we expect right now. For traffic, you'd be routed either north or south in that situation if you needed to get across the river, either north to Newburgh or south to Corvallis to get across. But again, pretty short impacts on those and really keeping them to the absolute minimum that's necessary for construction. The second one, which is a little bit longer, we're thinking in the order of a few months, is lane closures. So again, preparing for those joint replacements on either side of the bridge. We need to close 2 lanes, first on the south potentially, and then on the north. And for those, that would be in the order of 2 months. We're looking as many ways to reduce that as much as possible. We're looking at how to require 24/7 hour work for the contractor, potentially incentives and disincentives for overruns or expediency on the contractor's part, just trying to minimize those impacts as much as possible. And I would like to highlight, this is a 3 to 4 year project, and these impacts are going to be in the order of a few months. So we're already minimizing it as much as possible, but it's difficult to work on a bridge deck without impacting traffic. And there's just not a lot. I mean, one of the reasons this project exists is because there's not a lot of other great options for getting across the bridge in the vicinity. And then there's also ramp work, like I had mentioned earlier. So there will be some ramp closures. The impacts from those will be, I would say, less impactful. You'll still be able to get across the bridge, but just maybe not in the exact direction you might be wanting for that day. So you'll be able to get into downtown or well into downtown, but you might have to go around the block to get to the direction that you're going. So this one comes with 2 asterisks. This is our construction schedule. ODOT is tasked with providing a feasible construction method for the contractor. I'm yet to bid a project where the contractor keeps my exact construction schedule. So it'll likely look like this, but it'll look different in some way. I'm not sure exactly what that'll be, depends on who wins the bid. But what we expect in the beginning, 2026, like I said, is when we expect to start. They would start with water line relocation. So even outside of the bridge area, the city water lines are in conflict with some of our foundations. And so we'll be relocating those and preparing the either side for the new foundations. I think the contractor will likely prioritize their temporary works, getting their work bridge and their cofferdams in place, because there's a window in which contractors can work in the water. And so that's one of their critical path items, is getting those items in place. Once they've done that in 2027, we expect them to start working a lot on the east side, doing a lot of the shore work, continuing that in-water work activity, enlarging those foundations in the water, like we talked about, driving those piles and strengthening the work, strengthening the foundation in the middle. In 2028, we expect them to continue that work on the east side, to complete the work on the west side, that super bent that we were talking about, and then getting that water line work done. And then lastly, finish up on the east side. I think this is one of the last items they'll do, because that's one of their key staging areas. And then they'll reconstruct that parking lot. So in the area that the contractor is allowed to use as a construction area, they'll likely do some damage to the existing parking lot. And so they'll be repaving that area, replanting all those trees, and establishing a new parking lot for the city there and for park users. That said, here's my contact info. I encourage you guys to scan the QR code, sign up for emails. It's one of the best ways we can get updates out to the public. We send every month, every other month emails. And if you sign up for this particular area, you'll get emails for other ODOT projects that might impact you. And you'll get emails as well during construction. So this signing up on the email list will keep you up to date throughout construction as well. And my contact's up there. If you have questions, happy to take them. But if you have questions afterwards, my number and email are there. If you have anything, go ahead.
So when there are bridge closures in the limited fashion that you've described, how are emergency vehicles supposed to get across?
Good question. Depends on which closure we're doing. For the full closures, we're looking at putting a dedicated lane on Marion Street, which is the bridge going the other direction, right? And having the emergency services go the wrong way on that bridge. So just dedicating a single lane for them. It'd be in the evenings, and so it really wouldn't impact traffic on Marion in any significant way. It's not at capacity in the evenings anyways, and it would allow emergency services a more immediate access across. In the 2-lane closures, we're still developing that. I think we have some good ideas. There's in the 2-lane closures, it's hard to describe without a picture, but there's 2 ramps that you can get on Center Street. One of those ramps would be closed. And so the emergency services could use that ramp to get up to where the 2-lane closure begins, essentially. And then they could get into traffic, and traffic on the bridge should be flowing pretty well at that point, because it's already been bottlenecked down. And so that would get them across. But that's our current plan. We've been working with a number of emergency services. With Salem Police and Fire, we had a meeting, I think, earlier this week. No, it was last week, actually. Anyway, we met with a number of them. We still need to maybe circle all the wagons with all the emergency services and make sure that we're addressing all of their concerns. This is pretty hot off the press, our emergency service plan, so it's still in development. But that our intention is to keep them full access at all times. Yeah.
Mark, in terms of medical emergencies, recently my father-in-law fell, broke his arm, had to go to the same hospital at the VA. If there's no way for me to transport him, ambulance ride is $2,000. That's not covered. Where he wouldn't be able to travel an extra hour and a half to get to the hospital.
You mean during the full closures? You would still have access during the bridge.
There's a full closure, that accident happens. Our choice is going to be pay the $2,000 ambulance ride to get him there, or travel an extra hour to get to Salem Hospital.
Yeah, I mean, in that circumstance, we're accommodating the ambulances if they're emergencies. If you're taking them in a private vehicle, it's a little more difficult to coordinate using those emergency services. I could foresee a situation where we'll have flaggers on either end during the full closure. And you could discuss the emergency with them once you get there, but it won't be as streamlined as potentially an ambulance where dispatch is going to contact us ahead of time. But yeah, I think that's a good question, good concern that we can think about some more.
Brandon, then Councilor Matthews.
Question, just are you guys working with the city, Shane, you might be able to. In that area, you have a homeless community that really loves under bridges. Are you guys gonna be working with the planning on how you work through those complications? Or is that a city issue?
As far as during construction, how do we address it? Yeah, so before, I mean, we have a number of programs that deal with people experiencing houselessness. We do cleanings of that area almost monthly. During construction, the contractor is responsible for security, but we are planning for, you know, theft mitigation and that type of thing for the contractor. After construction, there won't be any change. The bridge will look very similar to what's already there. It's a retrofit. We're pretty adamant on keeping it as a retrofit. Scope creep is something that we're really not allowed to do in this project. It needs to maintain our retrofit. And so as far as any other aspects that would address houselessness, that's not part of the project. Yeah. I guess that's a good point. That's not, it will be included in this project, but it's not. Yeah, so there was a separate, and we decided to include. That's a good point, Bob. Thanks for reminding me of that. Yeah, so there's ODOT has already been fencing a lot of the areas under their bridges. They were planning on doing it for this bridge as well. For cost saving purposes, it made sense to put that money and that scope into this project. So there will be some fencing afterwards. That's a good point, Bob. I forgot about that.
Councilor Matthews.
And I don't know if this would be the best question for you, man. Direct one back there, but so with particularly the water line and the upgrade there, and then the movement of water lines that are ours, who is actually on the hook the cost of those water lines?
Depends on for what portion. For the upgrade and the resiliency, that's city. I mean, that's a city election, right? It's a city facility. It just happens to be on an ODOT property. For the areas that we're relocating for the seismic retrofit, that has nothing to do with the resiliency. It's split into two different ways. If we're relocating a city water line on city property, ODOT pays for it. If we're relocating a water line that's on ODOT property, then the city would pay for it.
Vice President Duncan.
So just timing in your budgetary process, when was this put on the books? Is this prior to the failure of the third bridge moving forward, or was this been on the books prior to that?
My understanding is that this project was funded in response to failure of the third bridge a while back. And so that's why it's coming to fruition, is that the third bridge would have provided a seismically resilient crossing, but the fact that we're not providing one of those, this made sense to include in the budget. So and it was funded by House Bill 2017.
Derek.
I know we're talking about Center Street today, but in regards to Marion Street Bridge, my interpretation of the article is that there's nothing that can really be done to that bridge. So can you speak to the future of what that looks like? Or...
As far as what we would do to upgrade that bridge in the future, I can't speak to that. That's people above me who make those kind of decisions, whether it would likely need to be replaced in the future. It's not a bridge that's appropriate for upgrades, similar to like the west side. When we really looked at it, it'd be like putting lipstick on a pig. It's just not made for that. It's an older bridge. It would cost almost as much to retrofit it as it would be to replace it. And so at that point, it doesn't make sense.
So oversimplify it, we're either waiting for it to fall in the river or another bridge to be built.
If there was an earthquake, we don't expect it to be serviceable afterwards. What the condition of it is, I mean, your guess is as good as mine. Earthquakes are not the most predictable animals, but we don't expect it to be serviceable in providing access for West Salem or downtown. Yeah. But as far as current service, it's structurally adequate for what's going over it now, but not for an earthquake.
Barring a major incident, what is its anticipated lifespan at this point?
I don't know the answer to that question off the top of my head. Yeah, good question though.
Seems like those 12 years of work on the third bridge may have been strategic work that this community needed. It's a bit editorial. Other questions for Andrew? Mark?
In terms of the retrofit, it would not allow any extra lanes to be added to the bridge in the future, or would this possibly allow that?
No lanes. Yeah, pretty limited scope on what we're doing on this project. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you potentially could add lanes in the future, but this project doesn't help that in any particular way. Yeah.
Something like this preclude another vote for trying to get a third bridge after seeing successful retrofit.
Like any red-blooded American, I have political opinions on what's possible and what's not. ODOT doesn't pay me for those, so I'll probably keep most of those myself. I'm not aware of any plans for a third bridge. I did hear rumors. Representative Evans had I think he looked at putting, you guys probably know this better than me, putting a commission together for a third bridge. I haven't seen anything that looks super promising as of yet. But your guess is as good as mine on politics.
We're all going to be riding bikes. It's okay. I'm teetering, aren't I, right there?
You're right there.
What's an inherent isn't in the room, Richard. Okay.
I first 70 is Mission Street was going to go straight ahead.
Yeah.
Downtown traffic, no everything, but the blind school and Bush Park filled that. I mean, that's rational to do. I mean, it has to weigh a lot of traffic, all of traffic actually. Straight on the Mission.
Yeah, as far as where a third bridge would be located or any future development, that's above my pay grade. I'm just a lowly bridge engineer.
We have myself included, full disclosure, we have a very active boating recreational group within our community. You mentioned that there was going to be some pathways for boats. Is this going to be very similar to what we're seeing at the Oregon Falls project, where you don't have any restrictions, that you just have to stay outside of safety areas?
Yeah, it'll be pretty similar to that. There'll be buoyed areas and that kind of thing. But as far as access, most people use the Wallace Marine Park access for recreational use. We don't plan to restrict that in any way at all. The contractor will be allowed to use it, but just like any other public user, they can access it to launch whatever vehicles they need, but they can't restrict it for any reason. Yeah.
Any last questions for Andrew? All right, join me in thanking Andrew for. You have Director Martin here, and I didn't know if you wanted any color from the city side or if you're just here to listen, Brian.
Well, I was here to listen and hearing the questions and the comments. Coordinating with ODOT, trying to minimize impacts to the city, and this is going to be very impactful. But we all know it's very needed to. We need to have something standing after the earthquake, so we're trying to balance those things. Make sure we're as coordinated as possible and minimizing the impacts as much as possible.
Yeah.
And I would just say with the third bridge discussions, a lot of that. Really haven't heard much on my end. That's why so I'm not sure where the city stands up.
Yeah, I think we need to give some great credit here. We have a very active city that engages with our business community, and the fact that Director Martin is here shows the city's commitment to continue to be engaged with this group. And Brian, I want to thank you for your leadership there on behalf of our small business community. Let's transition a little bit into a preview of next month. We obviously, I hope, I say obviously, I'm very close to this. I hope everybody is tracking the city budget process. Okay, so last night, another city budget committee, Jameson is present at each of those, and our organization is really tracking this. The city is developing their budget based on a couple scenarios, whether the livability levy were to pass or whether the livability levy were to go down in this community. We will have our CFO, Josh Eggleston from the city of Salem, as well as our deputy city manager, Krishna Namburi. And as well, we have a number of counselors who have stepped up, but I'd like to give Shane Matthews a lot of credit for being willing to come and present to this group. That body will be here in this room next month, and we want to talk about timeliness. They have to get this done. And the sequence of having them in front of us in June will be absolutely fantastic timing wise, because we'll be able to give some thoughts on the priorities. And there's some very interesting discussions occurring right now, including a proposal to possibly disconnect from our partnership with Avello. And secondly, there is a thought that if you're going to do cuts, you do them evenly across the board, not prioritizing public safety else, but looking at just a straight percentage, which I think we're going to receive some community pushback on. We need our business community involved in these discussions. And so your voice is going to be important, and you will probably have a call to action from our organization prior to that date to be present in that room, but share your thoughts on what's going on at Salem City Council, as well as on the budget committee. So please be watchful for that. We have a number of signs in support of the city livability levy, as well as Chemeketa bond campaign. If you are not feeling like those are your cup of tea and you have questions, I would be happy to talk to you personally about why our organization is endorsing them. And one of the strengths of our organization is we are not going to be always in perfect alignment with every member. We have a great diversity in our membership, and so sharing the why behind our strategic endorsements is very important, and we don't duck those. And so if you have a contrarian opinion to our endorsements, please reach out to me personally, Vice President Duncan. We have obviously Secretary Blair here. Our board wants to have those conversations and know that we're very transparent with the why behind our positioning. We look forward to seeing you next month. I want to thank Jameis and Gideon for helping put this great panel together. Our panel, thank you so much for spending your morning with us. And with that, folks, we're done a little bit early. Have a great day today.